My name is Paul. I'm a country realtor in the state of Virginia, and today I'm going to talk a little bit more about homesteading and how to find your ideal place. And we're going to look a little bit at maps. I have a specialty in rural property, and I live in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. And I encourage people to come to Virginia and homestead because Virginia has the most private farms of any state. And everywhere you drive around here where I live, I just see homestead after homestead with different kinds of animals and whatever they're doing there. Sometimes people have chickens or dogs or llamas or cows or something they're doing there, growing some crops or something. And it's really wonderful to see. It's a really beautiful way to bring up children to have access to the countryside, the fresh air, and the various kinds of animals and wildlife that live around. Now, today I'm going to talk a little bit about getting your place and how to look for property and land. Because a lot of people, it's a really noble idea to go out and get some land. And I know some people have gone a little bit premature. They say, well, I'm going to get this land. They find some place and they just buy this land. And then later on they find out, well, maybe it's not ideal as they thought. And they would wish they had bought something a little different. So I'm going to look at a little bit of maps here. Virginia has a lot of ravines. As you can see here, we got a 3D map behind me. And I'll use this as an example here. This is the upper Shenandoah Valley. This is the area that actually the Shenandoah River runs down right here. You see this valley here? This is a beautiful little valley, right sheltered in the middle between these two ridges here. The Blue Ridge Parkway goes along this kind of ridge here. That's really not a really great place to homestead because it was steep and rocky. But you look in all these valleys, if you want to find really great land, look for where a stream comes down through one of these valleys here. A lot of these streams will run for miles and miles and miles. And sometimes you'll have roads, little country roads that can run along near the streams. And you'll find pieces of property that are adjoining these streams because it was very, very popular for a long time. If you want to buy some land, you got to get some water on it. And Virginia has a lot of streams, as you can see. Now, some of these streams have been captured and they made a few lakes around, mostly just man-made lakes in Virginia. You find now some small ponds, usually it's made by a spring, but you don't find a lot of large ponds or lakes in the state of Virginia, except for man-made lakes. Now, again, see where the steep land is? This really area, you can find good land up here, but if you really want to have the land, the water, and you want to have the sun and everything, it's really better to get a little bit lower in the valley where you can catch more water and you have more exposure to sun and not as much shade, you see. And in some of these valleys, they're pretty wide. And there's a lot of beautiful open land. And if you can get a piece of land that's kind of in one of these valleys, there's many of them around the country, this type of valley, you'll find that there's a lot of open land and the water is running down from the hills and it irrigates and everything, and it's beautiful. And a lot of times, because people made country roads to follow the streams, you'll find sometimes even a tiny little stream, even the road that I live on, the stream, there's a tiny stream that goes up and it finally gets dry and goes up into the hills. But they made little roads along the streams because they're so accessible, and you could have your cows there in a big field right near me. There's a big huge cow field, and at the bottom there's a stream so the cows can wander all day and they got water and you got no problem. So if you buy land, go look for some really, you like to have the hills because that catches a lot of water. You see, if you're out in a really flat area here, what they call the Piedmont of Virginia, which is a little bit elevated but mostly kind of really low hills, nothing really big. You get up here, now you have really lots of water being caught, and there's loads of springs that run off these mountains. So again, try to buy what they call bottom land, whereas all the soil and waters come down there and collected in the bottom near one of these rivers or one of these streams. And a stream can be, we have some in Virginia, they're not that big, they're maybe 30, 40 feet wide, and in a big area, but they can carry an awful lot of water, especially when it rains. And those streams run for miles and miles and miles. They stock them with trout, and they feed the cattle and so on all along their path. So again, a little bit about looking for land. Now, if you want to go out and you want to have like just big open fields, then you might want to have something in the middle here instead of up on the slope here. You can have a pretty good garden in a small size on a fairly small piece of property that has some slope on it. But if you want to have a really big farm and maybe wheat or corn or something like that and easy to harvest, you'll probably want to be a little bit more in the flatter area, in the Piedmont area where they harvest a lot of timber. Trees grow all around, usually in areas where it's easy to harvest the trees. They've been harvested a couple times probably already in history. And so if you want really to have the really old growth type of trees, you really have to go up in the hills sometimes to find them, and then they're really kind of hard to harvest. But you can knock down some smaller scale harvesting instead of trying to bring a truck and bring in all the gear that you need to harvest a big forest. But you can harvest individual trees that might be on your property and get a substantial amount of wood from them and maybe clear a little area as well. So again, maps. This is a topographic map. A lot of people know about these already, and you can get them for almost every state here. This one's for Virginia, and I keep this in my pickup truck all the time when I drive around because, believe me, GPS doesn't work in some of these back places. And there are a lot of gravel roads in the state of Virginia that you can go on, and sometimes miles and miles of just gravel road, and you might not see many houses there. You might see some cabins or so on, and there's a lot of state and national land and forestry in the state of Virginia as well, like many other parts of the country. Now, if you look at a map carefully, there's keys on here, and it's really kind of hard to see, so I probably won't get into it too much here, but there's areas where the state forests are and the national forests. And if you look at them on a map, you'll find out where they are. And if you can get some land that's backed up where you're surrounded by state land or hunting type of land or recreational type of land, then nobody's going to build there. So now, in the old days when they made the forest, there were people living in some areas, so they were kind of grandfathered in. But typically in most national and state forests, they don't want you to go in there and build a bunch of new stuff, especially big recreational enterprises and gas stations and Walmarts and that sort of thing. You go in the state forest, there's very limited amount, and there's somewhat kind of restrictions on what you can do there with the land, depending on the state and so on. Now, I do suggest you get a map and learn to read it. And again, on a smaller scale, this here is a 3D map, and everything's in 3D. But if you look at the terrain maps here, a lot of people know this. I won't try to get into it too detail, but there's little lines on here that show the elevation above sea level. Now, people don't realize that sometimes that a state like Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, is nearly 1,000 feet above sea level, believe it or not. And what happened is the glaciers were on Ohio many thousands of years ago, and then over the centuries and slowly but surely the land lifts up a little bit because that tremendous weight was on the land. And, you know, apparently there's a reflex action and the ground sort of lifts slowly, surely, and Columbus, Ohio is 1,000 feet above sea level. I never realized that until I lived there for a while. Now, I live at about 1,250 feet above sea level, and the town I'm nearby is about 800 feet, so it's a few hundred feet down below me. And we're on the west side of the Blue Ridge ridge here. I'm a little further down here. This is the Blue Ridge, goes down here. All this over, this is in West Virginia over here. This part is Virginia, and it's all hilly around here. And if you want to get way up in the hills, you can do that, but you might not find electricity runs on that road and so on. So you might have to think about where you want to live. But you see these roads that go through the mountains? There's a lot of roads now that go through these hills. And typically they run along the valley, and then they go over a pass or a ridge to get over to the next valley. But basically, most of the roads that are going down most of these valleys have been electrified by now, and you can find a pretty nice little shelter in some of these little valleys around the country that have electricity, but they are kind of private and so on still. So again, I don't want to make these videos too long, and I appreciate the feedback and everything and all the comments, and just really encourage people to think carefully about when they buy the land, because like I said, I have a family member some years ago bought some land, and I went to look at it, and you know, it's okay, but it's not really the great land. There's water there, but you can't build near it because of the septic problem, and there's sand, and the soil is rocky and sloped and mostly wooded, and they're not really big, long hardwoods, so there's a mix of trees, but they're not really great, fantastic trees. So the land is great for recreation, and it's kind of in a boonies area. You have to drive about 6 miles down a gravel road before you get to it. But yeah, and you can build there, but it's be careful about where you buy land, because you might be attracted to a price of a piece of land. And the one I'm thinking of, the one I was talking about, was 1 acre wide and 10 acres long. Well, that's a long strip of land, and it's 200 feet by 1,000 feet, or actually more like 2,000 feet. So it's sort of a strange shape, and a lot of builders, a lot of developers, they'll find a big chunk of land and they say, okay, what are we going to do with all this big forest land? Okay, just like draw a bunch of lines and make a bunch of parcels and sell them. Okay, so whatever. And they sell them for whatever they can get from them. And sometimes you buy really cheap land at $1,000 an acre, and then if you can sell for $5,000 an acre, you got some money, some leeway in there to fix up, maybe build a couple little roads or something. But be careful about when you buy land, because you might be attracted by one feature, but it may have a really strong debilitating feature elsewhere, you see. So you want to make sure that you have a combination of features that's going to make a really nice homestead. You need the water, you need the soil, you need some trees, you need some open area so you can grow and get some sunlight. It's nice to have a spring. It's nice to have some fencing, or certainly you need a driveway to get in there. So think of all the different things that you need on your piece of land, and how is it going to fit into the big context of where it is, because you want it to be reasonably accessible, but not be overrun in the next 5 years, because sometimes you build a place now, 20 years from now, you'll be a nice big road nearby, but you got 20 years to raise your family. By that time, maybe you'll be high value real estate and you can sell it. But there's something to think about, the long-term effect of what you're doing, because when you build a homestead, it's a lifetime thing, and you might pass it down to your family. So think really carefully, investigate, look around for the right piece of land, and again, soil. Try to get some sunny slope. You use the guidepost or the compass to see this is north up this way, and if you put like a house on the north side of a slope, it's not going to be a very nice place to build a house. If you want to build a little bit better situation, build on the south slope where you have some sunshine that comes in, and not too steep either, because water will rush down. You want water, but you don't want it running down, like pouring down so hard that it'll wash out your driveway. So I hope this has been helpful, a little bit about buying land and topography, terrain, and where you might find it. Follow streams and rivers, ask around, look what's nearby, check the records, see whether there might be some public property around you. There might be some easements on the property that you need to know about. You can buy a piece of property, and then next thing you know, you find out, well, the guy up there, further up the hill, he's got a right of way right through your property, because that's the only way you can get to it. So you don't want to be in that situation, unless it's a family member maybe. But then, even then, you might sell it someday, and then you'll have that easement right through your property. So again, think carefully about where you buy land, the type of topography, the way it's facing, the various elements of the land, and how they combine together to make a real operating homestead, and not just a place to stick a house and a shed. Okay? So thanks again for listening, and I hope to see you in some of my other content.